You're listening to KWills from KWills Creative, and this is Exploration Echoes, Tales from the Underground. This is a unique insight into the stories of the explorers, the conservationists, the interpreters, the tour guides, the managers, volunteers, scientists, and many more. All who have made caves their playground, their workplace, or purely a place to explore. What makes them tick? What is it that sends them into the unknown? What have they found? What's their favourite cave? How did they get into caving? These are just some of the questions that will be answered in this podcast. Okay, so today I've got with me Matt Smith, well, over the phone actually. Welcome, Matt.
G'day, how are you?
Yeah, good. Now, tell me a bit about your caving history, Matt. So what organisations are you linked in with?
So I guess my primary background as caving is actually through the Scout Caving group here in South Australia, and that's what introduced me to caving probably about 35 years ago now, when I went out to visit a couple of the caves in the cliffs of the Murray River as a teenager, and it kind of was I guess something that kind of resonated with me, and here we are 35 years later, still doing the same thing. And I'm still involved in the Scout Association, currently as the branch commissioner for the caving team, which kind of means I run the caving team, and we look after taking probably about 200 to 300 scouts into caves each year, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. And what sort of caves, like where are those caves located? Where do you go?
A lot of our caving is down at Narracourt.
Okay.
So we work pretty closely with the team down at the national park there, and we visit a range of sites there. There are a few wild caves that we use, such as the adventure section of Stick Tomato Cave, Blackberry Cave, and there's a couple of smaller caves that we trundle around in called Appledore Cave and Little Vic Cave, which is actually part of the big Victoria Fossil Cave, but it's kind of a separate annex, I would say.
Yes.
But they're all pretty. I think a lot of experienced cavers would categorize them as not overly adventurous, but for the novices that we take caving, they're actually really good experiences because they have a real blend of pretty things to see in caves. There's a lot of the remnants of fossil records and other scientific parts, as well as some nice squeezy things and climbing and all those kind of fun things that kids like to do. So.
Yeah. And so when you go, you mentioned that you might take over the space of a year 250 odd scouts. On each of those trips, how many would there be?
It does kind of vary quite a bit. We would run probably from sometimes up to about 10 trips a year. So some of them are bigger. The ones down at Narracourt the numbers tend to be about 30 to 40 kids. And then we kind of run them on a round robin style program throughout the caves. They also get to do one of the show cave tours into Victoria Fossil Caves, where they can actually get a nice talking to from one of the guides who tells them in much better detail than what I can, some of the the scientific values of the cave as well. And then we also have for our older scouts, the ones that are more teenagers and above, we run a few, I guess I'd call them expedition style caving trips. So we have an annual trip over to the Nullarbor, which we run over there for about a week, where we go and visit a range of caves in the area. We go up to the Flinders Ranges. We try and get up there about once per year at least. There's actually some really cool caves in the Flinders Ranges, which kind of well known in the caving community, perhaps not well known outside of the caving community.
Yeah, I even as someone in the caving community, I knew there was caves in the Flinders, but didn't realise the extent of the caves that are up there until recently.
Yep. Not a lot of them are very accessible in a show cave kind of way. They all require a decent bit of adventure, whether it's crawling through some horrible squeezes or a 17-meter abseil. There's a bit of a barrier to entry to some of the caves in the Flinders Ranges, but some of the decoration and the speleothems and the crystal growth in these caves is, I think it's actually something really unique to South Australia, and some of my favourite caves are in that area for sure.
Wow. Wow. And so when you're with the Scouts, do you ever do any mapping or looking for extensions to caves and that sort of thing?
Our program with the Scouts is typically it's very similar on most trips, and we allow the Scouts to have a go at exploration, but it's normally we're visiting caves that have been very well surveyed and documented over the last really over the last 100 years effectively.
Yeah.
But the kind of experiences we give to the Scouts is we have maps of all these caves, and we might say to some of the kids, all right, here's the map. We're now at the entrance. Why don't you take us to this chamber over here? And it really gives some of those kids the opportunity to kind of go, wow, this is a cave map, and I'm actually able to kind of find my way through this cave.
Yeah.
We get a compass out and they try and work out the directions they need to go in. Yeah, the really hard thing to work out with cave maps. I mean, you've probably seen plenty of cave maps, and some are better than others. But
Yes.
the scale on cave maps is sometimes pretty interesting. A lot of these
Yeah.
caves we go to, some of them are big, some of them are small, and for young adults to kind of decipher some of these cave maps can be a pretty interesting challenge sometimes. It's very different to looking at traditional topographic map out in the bush. So
Absolutely. And navigating your way through a cave is quite different, isn't it, to navigating through the bush or where you've got easy landmarks to find.
Yeah. But we have a wide range of cavers that help out in the Scout Caving Group, and one of the other hats that I kind of wear is being on the KWills committee. So we have quite a lot of overlap with, I guess, the broader caving community, and quite a few of our leaders are pretty involved in projects such as the work we've been doing on Kangaroo Island, and various other locations around Australia as well. So as a Scout leader, I do try and really promote our part of caving into the broader caving community, and really kind of tell our leaders and our kids that we're really part of a nationwide group of really interesting cavers with very diverse interests.
Yeah, there are some amazing people in KEGSA. And just for our listeners who may not know what KEGSA is, it's the Cave Exploration Group of South Australia, and has been operating for many, many years, and has been an integral part of finding and exploring new caves or new sections to caves, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. We just actually celebrated our 70th anniversary this year, so and we headed down to Narracourt with quite a few KEGSA members, both young and old, and we heard numerous stories from some of our esteemed members such as Grant Gartrell and Graham Pilkington, and really kind of talking about what some of the achievements of the group were. And as a Scout caver, I was really interested to note that a good percentage of KEGSA was founded by Scouts, and in fact some of the early meetings were held out at the Scout headquarters. So the connection between Scouting and cavers, I think, is actually pretty strong in Australia.
Yeah, and certainly is in South Australia. Having worked as a tour guide at Narracourt, I know that I had a close connection with the Scout groups that used to come and visit quite regularly. So you mentioned briefly that you've been caving for over 35 years. What would be the most significant thing that hits your mind when you think about all the different caves and places you've been to?
Probably I would say, if I think about the various caves that I've visited, there's a couple of Tasmanian caves that really kind of stand out as being really kind of wow moments for me, and that would be Kubla Khan and Creases Cave, which I think many cavers in Australia would agree are some of the most amazing caves that we have in Australia. But in the last few years, we've actually spent quite a bit of time on Kangaroo Island doing quite a bit of study and documentation of the caves over there. And that's really given me an exposure to what it takes to actually really kind of explore and document an area of karst, which has been relatively unexplored compared to most of the mainland areas in South Australia. And it's really kind of opened my eyes to the amount of work and the amount of effort that a lot of our predecessors in the caving community put into in documenting some of the great records we have there at the moment. So
Yes, yeah. And a lot of that work that you've been doing, has that been happening since the 2019-2020 bushfire event that occurred on Kangaroo Island?
yeah, that's right. So we've been hearing great things about Kangaroo Island and the caves there, especially from Grant Gartrell, and having a friendship with Nick Heath as well, and David Gillison too. They all spoke very highly of the caves that were there, and we were all pretty sad to hear about the bushfires. But one of the really interesting things that happened following the bushfires is that the government went and did a whole bunch of aerial photography and LiDAR scans over the entire island.
Mm.
We managed to get a hold of those, and as we were poking around having a look, we were recognizing that there were hundreds of what looked to be holes in the ground that really had never been documented, mostly because of the density of the scrub out there. There's a lot of Acacia paradoxa, which is quite a thorny plant.
Yeah.
The vegetation is very dense. It's very hard to get anywhere. And we kind of saw this as an opportunity to go, well, there's no vegetation out there at the moment, but this is probably a really good opportunity to kind of really, deeply understand what the karst environment is like in that area.
Yeah. Having been a caver over there and worked at Kelly Hill Caves, and gone to some of the wild caves in that area, through that dense bushland, it is really tough to get through. So yeah, it would have been prime opportunity despite the devastating bushfires. But yeah, definitely a perfect opportunity to have a look around and see what is actually there when there's no vegetation. And
Yeah, it sure was.
yeah. So was there any significant finds that you found? Were there any major fossil deposits or caves in dramatic size or anything like that you found? Are you able to talk about any of that?
Yeah, definitely. So when we started the journey of exploring the island post bushfires, there were probably around about 100 caves documented by KEGSA in the area.
Mm.
We got over there in October following the bushfires, and we really just wanted to go over there and get a feel for what it was like. So we grabbed our maps and went for a walk, and we found all these holes in the ground and thought, wow, this is a really great opportunity. Over the next couple of years, we explored. Initially, we were really just looking at visiting features on the surface, just to document, document their longitude and latitude, so that we actually had a good feel for where everything was.
Yeah.
And then after about a year or so of doing that, we started exploring some of these holes that we'd found. Kind of, I guess, cherry picking the ones that we thought looked more interesting than others, and we found quite a few smaller caves out there. I think there's probably about 20 to 30 caves, which are, I guess, kind of single chamber caves. Not a heap worth exploring, but we have found a few that are actually decent in size, and probably one of the biggest ones is one that we have named Phoenix Cave.
Oh.
And this is a cave which is on it's on the western end of the Kelly Hill sand dune, I'll call it. So
Yes.
this cave has about an 8-meter solution tube to climb down into an initial chamber, which is not a huge chamber, but it's actually quite a well decorated chamber. And we got into this cave on one trip, and we just looked around this chamber and thought, wow, this is pretty nice. It's got stalagmites, stalactites, and a few bugs and spiders and whatnot kind of running around. And we kind of made a note saying, yeah, this looks really good. We need to come back. We got back about I think about a year later. We pushed this cave, and we've since added probably about 500 meters worth of tunnel onto the cave, including one pretty spectacular chamber that we ended up calling the birthday chamber, because it happened to be the birthday of one of our teammates when we found it, which is just full of just these beautiful, amazing straws, some stunning flowstone, and just really nice decoration. But it's a pretty challenging cave. The climb down is pretty interesting. There's a few little squeezy bits to get through into the remainder of these big chambers in the cave. There's quite a bit of, not really mud, it's kind of like mud, it's kind of like a clay mud that you're going to kind of go through, which is never a lot of fun.
No.
And it's probably gone on to be, I would say it's one of the bigger caves on Kangaroo Island.
Wow.
Unfortunately, yet we haven't found anything that really kind of matches this size yet, but we still actually have a decent amount of work left on the island there. I think that there's probably a good another 20 or 30 sites that really have only had a cursory exploration. So you
Yeah.
just don't know what you're going to find until you get in there.
Yeah, I'm always entertained by the names that are given to caves and some of their chambers. And yeah, certainly one that springs to mind on Kangaroo Island is Fright Night.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Whoop Whoop out the back of the Kelly Hill Show Cave. Just a
Yeah.
perfect name for that particular area of the cave.
It's a beautiful spot, and we were lucky enough to go out there on our last trip. And I've never actually, I've been to Kelly Hill Cave numerous times and done various little bits of wild caving there, but never been into Whoop Whoop. And it's a really beautiful part of the cave. In fact, I'd say probably one of the prettiest chambers I've been in South Australia. That's for sure.
Yes, yeah, I have to admit it is for me too. Certainly, there is some spectacular spots at Narracourt out the back of Victoria
Mm.
Fossil Cave, but yeah, it still doesn't beat Whoop Whoop. And yeah, to be one of probably less than 100 people who have ever been in there is
Yeah,
pretty special as well, and that's something
sure
that
is.
that is hard for the general population to comprehend, that a lot of these places that us as cavers go to, not very many people get to go. So there's
Mm.
very few sets of eyes who have actually looked at it. There's very few sets of feet that have walked across it, and yeah, it is a very special thing that we get to do. And
Yeah,
yeah, and that would be something that you would instill in your scouts as well, isn't it? That they are actually doing something that not a lot of people get to do,
mhm.
even though they might be crawling and climbing through a cave that's been known about for 100 years or so. They're still one of a few who get to actually do it.
Yeah. One of the first things that was drilled into me when I started caving as about a 15-year-old was really trying to be aware of the minimal impact standards and the way that we actually approach moving through a cave. And it's something that we continue to do. In fact, it's a core part of our scouting kind of badge work, I suppose, in this space. Is to really have a good understanding of not just the minimal impact in caving, but also when we're camping, when we're bushwalking, when we're doing a whole range of activities. We want to make sure that these beautiful natural environments are preserved for the future generations, and also preserved for those who are looking at studying them more deeply as well. So
Yes, yeah, because if we don't do that, then in 10 years time or 20 years time, when technology is better than what it is today, and someone does actually want to go back and study something about a section of a cave, or it might even be a fossil site or an archaeological site in a cave that they want to study and find out, well, what is the history there? If we've ruined it by climbing through it and traipsing all over it and picking up bits and moving them and that sort of
yeah,
thing, it's not going to be as easy for those people in the future to do those studies. So yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate what the scout groups, that ethos that they have, and groups like KEGSA as well, who basically wrote the standards, didn't they, for low impact caving, and making sure that those who do go caving follow set guidelines.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the initial who initially wrote those standards, but I know that KEGSA was very involved in setting up the ASF, and I have no doubt there were many extremely well regarded cavers in KEGSA who very interested in preserving the caves. And the fact that these caves at Narracourt had fossils and that there was value in them has been really recognised for a very long time. So
Yes.
um, it's a super important part of caving. And you know as a caving community, we haven't always treated caves well, but I think as we've moved on through time, the standards that we hold ourselves to have definitely increased quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what have you noticed as some of the challenges, and how do your scouts get beyond those?
So there's a couple of really interesting challenges that we have at Naracoorte, and we, as we tend to find, kids are all very different. They come from such a wide variety of backgrounds, and they have a very wide uh, range of abilities as well, I suppose. So
Hmm.
we try and make our caving trips as accessible as we can. But there's obviously some limiting factors in regards to being able to crawl around a cave, which make it not completely accessible. But we really try and make our caving as safe for those who are willing to give it a go as possible. So probably we tend to work with a lot of kids who are very nervous about going into caves. And sometimes that's just a general bit of nerves. Sometimes we work with kids that are maybe on the spectrum somewhere, and they have a few other reasons for feeling a bit worried about what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually train pretty hard as leaders, trying to build up a range of techniques and approaches that we can use for moving the kids through the caves. Um, and that works really well for the most part. We often find that sometimes these kids that are really nervous about going into a cave, once they kind of get in there and they understand that it's not just about trying to force yourself through this tiny hole, or the roof's going to cave in on you, or there's going to be spiders or bats or things like that in there. They actually really start to enjoy it and embrace the challenge of being somewhere a little bit out of their comfort zone.
Yes, yeah. Having been one of those children
Mm,
when I was going to school at Naracoorte, I'm afraid of heights, and
yeah.
I still am today. I still get the sweaty palms and the shaky legs, and I can't explain it. But down in a cave, I'm fine.
Mm, mm,
Even at certain heights in caves, I can be fine, and I put it down to I can't see as far in the darkness with my torchlight. Um, and perhaps that's why I'm not as afraid when I'm in a cave
yeah.
and climbing. But I was one of those kids who was on the edge with the abseil rope, shaking like crazy, sometimes in tears, and really didn't want to go in. But once I was in there, I was fine.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. We see it all the time. It's
yeah,
certainly one of the more rewarding parts of being a caving guide. So,
and I think that's one of the most it's challenging, but it's also really rewarding for the scouts or the students as well, is
mm,
pushing beyond that fear and getting that I guess it's almost like a high out of doing
mm,
it,
mm.
because you've achieved something that you honestly didn't believe you'd be able to do. And the look on their faces once they've done it, and the excitement in their voices, and as you would know, you listen to them afterwards and hear them talking about it, and you think back to that scared little child at the beginning, and think, wow, you've really grown out of this. It's really been worthwhile.
They're pretty unique experiences, and they're not. They're something that not all kids get to do. So we think it's very special to be able to to be able to introduce kids into these environments, and really being able to watch them grow and embrace the challenge is hugely rewarding.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So over the years, do you have a favourite cave?
So I guess going back to the Flinders Ranges, I suppose. So well, I
Yeah,
think one of my favourite caves there would be Mare's Cave in the Flinders Ranges.
yeah.
I'm not sure if you've been to Mare's Cave, but it has a 17-meter abseil to get inside the cave. It's got this big cage on top of it, which you throw a rope down and you abseil in, and provided you can get past the sweaty palms and the shaking bit at the top, you kind of end up down the bottom, and then you end up in this actually quite a large chamber. It's probably about 80 meters long. It's got a ceiling height of about kind of 15 to 20 meters. And then it has all of these little chambers which kind of shoot off to the side. And quite often these little chambers have small speleothems in them, or crystals, or even in some of them they have quite notorious squeezes. So
Oh,
there's there's one in there called the 8¼ inch squeeze.
Oh my goodness.
Which I went through in when I was about 16, and I remember that being probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life in a cave, and I'm not willing to go back there again. In fact, I kind of whenever we take scouts in there and we get some little volunteer to go in, my heart's always a bit, kind of beating my chest, going, "Oh, what happens if they don't get out?"
Yeah.
Thankfully, we haven't had that. Yeah, it hasn't been, it's not quite that challenging or dangerous that we think people are genuinely going to get super stuck. But yeah, there is always a little bit of risk management and a bit of thinking, well, are we sending people into a situation that perhaps is beyond them, or something might go wrong that we haven't thought about. So
yeah, and it does come down to the individual as well. And yeah, I've interestingly taken my husband now. He was only my boyfriend at the time, but I took him caving, and my brother-in-law at the time was caving with us, and he's 6'4" and quite a large man, in terms of very muscular. And I thought for sure that we would get him stuck before getting Greg stuck, and Greg got stuck. Gary was able to push with his long legs, whereas Greg, his chest got stuck, and of course he did the whole, "Oh, I'll breathe in and make myself smaller," but of course that makes you bigger.
Yeah, it does.
And so there was a bit of talking and calming down, and he still married me, so that was something.
Look, that calming down approach is actually typically the one that works best when you have a kid or even an adult in any kind of challenging situation in the cave, and it's probably one of the first go-tos that we get to when we have a child who's struggling for whatever reason, whether they are actually in a tight section and they're really struggling, or even sometimes they're in a section we would consider to be a bit larger, but they're, say, mentally really struggling with the challenge of actually pushing themselves through there. So, and actually sitting down with them, talking through their breathing, actually trying to get them to, get out of this a crisis moment in their head is normally the best way to actually kind of get them through. And once they've calmed down, their bodies have loosened up a little bit, their breathing is back to normal, they often find that they can either continue the way that they're going, or they know, well, I got in here, so I know how to get out. And once you get them back into that place, it sometimes becomes an easy situation to manage. So
yeah, and a lot of cavers, myself included, we find that caves are a place of calm for us. I know that I easily go down into a cave, turn off all the lights, and just meditate. And
we call that cave napping in the scout caving group. So.
Yeah. But it is. I know that when even if it's with a group of 30 people, I walk into a cave and I feel calm as soon as I've walked into that space. Do you have that sense when you're caving?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually feel kind of the older I get, the more I kind of appreciate that, to be honest. Because when I was younger, I was very interested in exploring these tight sections and doing some challenging climbs and pushing my body to where it could go. But as I kind of get older, it's a bit like, well, I enjoy the serenity and the beauty of the caves quite a bit more than the adventurous sides, and I think that complements my interest in exploration and cave mapping to a degree as well. So.
Yeah, and it is an interesting psyche. Having talked to a couple of doctors about it, and they've suggested that it is quite unique that people like us who do enjoy the serenity, as you say, of the cave environment, compared to those who get the cold sweats and the thoughts of, well, it's going to just crumble in on me.
Yeah, for sure. One of the really other interesting challenges that we have with some of the Narracoorte caves, and especially in the smaller caves like Little Vic, is the cave crickets that live inside those caves. So there are a lot of kids, there's a lot of adults for that matter, who are not great with creepy crawlies. And I'm not sure if you've been into Little Vic Cave, but the first chamber you get in there is not very high. It's maybe 50 centimeters high. So you're kind of lying there and the cave crickets are right there in your face. And for some kids, they're like, is this a spider? Is it going to bite me? Is it? And trying to talk kids through that situation is really hard. We all know that cave crickets are harmless. They just kind of hang around. They
Yeah.
tend to, when we're in the cave, they tend to just sit in the corner and keep to themselves. So, but to sometimes to explain to a child or even an adult that they're harmless, that we can
Mm.
just move past them without any kind of problem is yeah, very challenging for some. And we've had many kids in tears in that part of the cave that we otherwise would have thought, well, it's not tight, so I don't know what's going on. But the
Yeah.
cave crickets have got to them, so to speak.
and to explain what cave crickets are, they are a cricket, but they have these big long legs like daddy long legs and
Yeah.
big long antennae, and they do look a bit like a spider when you first look at them, and don't really know what they are, and they can move quickly at times and scamper away from the light, and it's that quick movement, I think, that you're not quite sure what it is that you've seen. And
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you're dealing with bugs in your house or in your garden or whatever, you're normally kind of at arm's length to get a spider in the
Yeah.
corner of the ceiling or whatever. When you're in this cave and it's kind of like 20 centimeters from your head, it's like, well, I'm really up close and personal with these bugs, so
Yeah.
it's very different.
Yeah, it is very different. Have you had any experience with other creatures in caves? Like quite a lot of us who have been caving have had encounters with snakes or other things as well.
Yeah, snakes are pretty high up there on our risk management plans.
Yeah.
We thankfully we don't see them too often. So,
Yeah.
and I guess we have the standard approach for trying to scare away the snakes is to kind of stomp around a bit, and that tends to sort them out. But we thankfully don't have too many problems. Normally, where we do have problems with snakes, it actually tends to be in caves with kind of deeper solution tube type entrances. Quite often they'll fall down into the cave, and then they will kind of loiter around the bottom. If they can't get out themselves, they'll loiter down the bottom where the sunlight is. More often than not, they're a bit sleepy. It's a cold environment. It's dark. They're not really able to survive in that environment, so they're often probably on their last legs. But every now and then, if it's a fresh one, they can be reasonably aggressive. So we definitely need to be mindful of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
We found all kinds of things in caves. We've found several echidnas in caves before, but I know that we've rescued one out of a cave at one point. Obviously, we have plenty of bats in South Australia. They tend to be, certainly the cave bats tend to be more limited to the amount of caves that they are in, and recreational cavers and even research cavers don't often go into the big maternity sites or the sites with many bats in them, just out of respect for their their well-being as much as anything else.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, certainly on Kangaroo Island, I remember rescuing a goanna out of a cave, and yeah, we've had all sorts of things, including a mouse spider once that I nearly put my hand on.
We kind of found the wildlife on Kangaroo Island was pretty interesting. So that the first trip that we went there, where everything was kind of burnt out, there wasn't a lot going on. We actually saw quite a few lizards kind of running around, and I think that they were kind of in this somewhat compromised environment where maybe their traditional hiding places were not quite as well established. About 6 months, we come back and there were spiders everywhere. Like all of the dead trees had these massive kind of like orb weavers and all kinds of things kind of between them, and you're forever kind of dodging around or getting caught in a net or something. And then later on, we found snakes were everywhere. So it's just like the cycle of the recovery. And the recovery in Kangaroo Island has actually been pretty remarkable. That you almost wouldn't know that there's been a bushfire out where the caves are at the moment. The vegetation has really returned to that very dense state. When you're walking through the bush there, you're lucky to be able to see more than 5 meters in front of you, really. So.
It's incredible, isn't it? You'd think, because it was like an atomic bomb had gone off where the fires were.
It was.
And I mean, I went in to the fireground, the fires were still burning, and as part of the country fire service, and there was no sound. There was, no birds twittering. There was nothing. And it was the most eerie, strange experience to witness. And then to see it, as you say, start coming back, and gradually different things were coming back. And to see it with that really dense vegetation again is so fantastic. Yeah.
could do with the less of the Acacia paradoxa, but
yes, for sure. And it is great that you were able to capture those moments of when it wasn't as heavily vegetated as well, to be able to document new things and continue that exploration, which is fantastic.
One of the cool things these days is everyone has their phone on them or cameras floating around, so we have many photos kind of documenting the last 5 years of conditions out on the island. So it's really cool. We've digitized all the records. We've created a database of all the discoveries we found. We've used ArcGIS and other tools for documenting locations and even loading in cave surveys into it as well. So it's been quite a wide-reaching project. And in fact, this weekend, I think we have an archaeologist going across to have a look at a few records over there to understand what their values are too. So it's there's quite a bit to it. We're still looking at working with some biologists and so on to actually look at probably some of these insects and spiders and creepy crawlies out there. And there's probably a lot of those which are undocumented, but we look at them and we see spider, but are we sure that it's actually a spider that's well known, or is it something new? We don't know yet.
We don't know.
I'm certainly not a spider expert.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is, and having talked to people like Dr. Richard Glatz on Kangaroo Island and other people, Jess Marsh and who do study the science and study the bugs and the spiders and the insects and all the different things that are out there, they both tell me that there is so many undocumented species out there that we're still yet to find. So it will be interesting in the next few years as to what is found and what we start to learn to know about them. So yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. I think we might wrap it up here. But is there anything else that you would like to add as a final footnote, I guess?
Look, I'd really just like to. I've kind of talked about scouting quite a bit, and I'd love to just highlight the value that scouting really does add to the caving community. I think sometimes recreational caving, especially with scouts and so on, is viewed with a bit of a different lens from cavers sometimes, and that perhaps there's more damage being done to the caves than we would like. But I think it's worth acknowledging that modern scout cavers are actually, extremely respectful of the conditions in the cave. We're teaching from day one all of our scouts that the minimal impact values and the way we treat caves is super important. So.
Absolutely. And I think scouts and scout caving has come a long way in the last 30 years, for sure.
And recreational caving is where almost all of us have got an introduction to caves. So we're not only giving kids a good time by showing these environments, but we are we're inspiring people. We're inspiring people to become paleos or insect researchers or geologists or all these kind of things. So.
Yeah, or even cave guides.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've certainly known some scouts who have gone on to work in caves and done a fantastic job as a cave guide. So yeah, it's fantastic, and it is certainly, Scouts is certainly a fantastic stepping stone into the world of science and the world of nature, and all those adventurous things as well.
Yeah, it sure is. It certainly was for me. I've been out there bushwalking and canyoning and caving and climbing and abseiling for the last 35 years and had a ball every minute of it. So.
Yeah, and I can hear it in your voice that you still really love it. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me on this podcast, and I wish you all the best in the future with future scouts and cave explorations and all those sorts of things.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.